Howdy friends, Wes here checking in with a bit of a different video today. Want to do something a bit different. Sometimes it just gets a little bit stale doing the same kind of videos over and over again. Today I wanted to talk about our visit last weekend to the Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex here in Florida. A place I actually had never been to. Surprisingly, being someone who's lived in Florida all my life, I had just never visited the Visitors Complex. I have been to this Kennedy Space Center before for a shuttle launch. I was able to get into one of the employee viewing areas at one point, thanks to a family friend, so that was really cool to be able to get really close to a space shuttle launch and see that in person. So that was really awesome. But I'd never been to the sort of the touristy visitors area before to see displays and the history of space flight, the history of the Kennedy Space Center. So it was really cool to be able to visit that this past weekend, learn a lot and explore it, and really had a great experience. I wanted to share that with you, share with you some of the photos I brought back with me, and sort of give a recap of the place. And maybe someone who is not from Florida and maybe be visiting Florida in the future wanted to know whether this is something that they should do or not. Maybe I'll give you a better feeling for the place and let you know if you think it's something you're going to want to do. So before we get into it, I'm going to be layering in some photos here, talking about our experiences while I'm talking about our experiences. And just for those that are following along with photography related stuff that I do, all these pictures were shot with my Olympus OMD EM10 with either the Panasonic 20mm f1.7 prime lens or with the Olympus Kit 14 to 42 f3.5 to 5.6 lens. Those were the two lenses I used. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. Got there pretty early in the day, wanted to make a full day of it. Glad I did, as we really didn't even get to do everything that we wanted to do. So before I go any further, if you're thinking about the Kennedy Space Center and whether to visit, if you're looking for thrill rides, if you're looking for a theme park, the Kennedy Space Center is not for you. If you want to get up close and personal with real, legit spacecraft, you know, stuff that's been to space and back, or stuff that was built meant to go to space, the real deal, not some sort of mock-up, then the Kennedy Space Center is definitely a worthwhile visit. That's sort of the gist of this, is what's going to be. Upon first entering the park, you come across what they call the Rocket Garden. You got Apollo, Gemini, and Mercury rockets. All there are simulated space capsules that you can get into to feel how small and tight and how tin can like they are. It's pretty impressive to think that people climbed into these things and went to space. There's not really much there. Yeah, it's an extremely dangerous thing to think about doing. I don't think I would have the balls to do it. It's pretty impressive to get up close with these rockets and the early spacecraft that we used here. There's also the Apollo 11 gantry that the astronauts walk down. This is the real one they walk down, not a mock-up. The real piece from the launch pad there. Really cool rocket garden. It's really laid out nicely. They do have some guided tours with people explaining the different history of the rockets and whatnot. So that was a really cool thing to start out the day with. After that, we went to the Mission to Mars exhibit. Pretty interesting exhibit, a little bit of a letdown for me actually. I've actually recently been reading The Martian, so I'm kind of interested in Mars travel and you know, it's kind of on my mind recently. it was really cool to be able to see Mars rovers that have already been sent to space, and we got to see the model of the Mars rover that plays a big role in this story here. I won't say any more about that. It was really cool to be able to see some of these Mars-related spacecraft, some models of some things they're working on that will help get us closer to Mars. It was a pretty nice exhibit. You could tell it was kind of done on a budget. I guess something in the future that can be added onto maybe once we do more exploration of Mars. It was a nice, quick little exhibit to see and learn a little bit more about Mars travel. So after we did the Mission to Mars exhibit, that took us over to the Atlantis exhibit, Space Shuttle Atlantis exhibit. We spent over 3 hours at this exhibit. This exhibit alone was worth the price of admission to the park. I was pretty blown away. I didn't expect to get as emotional as I did exploring this exhibit. Being here from Florida, I went to a very progressive grade school, and the space program played a large part in our education. And any time the teachers had a chance to tie in what we were learning about with the space program, that was always a big part of our education. We had a launch control center and a mission control center, and we actually did simulated launches and things like that. So the space program played a huge part in my growing up in the early to mid 80s. It was really emotional to be able to see these real artifacts and be able to experience all these things related to the space shuttle program. The orbiter Atlantis was just, the way they had it set up in the building, it's so graceful, it's so beautiful. They really couldn't have done better. They knocked it out of the park as far as I'm concerned with this exhibit. As I said, very emotional just from a beauty standpoint, very emotional from a loss standpoint. There is an area dedicated to the missions that didn't complete. I'm tearing up now already. It was a very emotional experience. We both cried, particularly with the Challenger. We watched that from from our schools, and it brings back a lot of emotions, and it was really beautifully done, and I really appreciate the care that was put into this exhibit. Just an awesome exhibit. There is a ride you can go on that simulates a shuttle launch, which is pretty fun. There's several different movies and displays and interactive areas, and you can practice landing the shuttle. You can practice doing a spacewalk. Yeah, just overall an excellent exhibit, very emotional experience. As I said, we spent over 3 hours in the exhibit. If I have one critique of the Atlantis exhibit, is that I would like to have seen more of the space artifacts, more of the shuttle-related artifacts. There's a lot of space as you walk into the exhibit. The exhibit sort of leads you up some walkways to where you get to the upper level of the building, and then as you go through the exhibit, you sort of work your way down through the building, and that area where you're walking up to the higher area of the building, it's kind of open and plain. So along those walls, they could really use that space to display some more of the tools that were used on the space shuttle. They could display maybe some space suits. There's a lot of space there where they could really use to display some artifacts. I would like to have seen a lot more artifacts. That's kind of the one thing that I felt was missing from the Atlantis exhibit. But other than that, as I said, they really knocked it out of the park. They did it right. The orbiter itself is just it's incredible. It's just, you don't want to leave. It's so beautiful to just be right. You can almost touch it. It's so close. So yeah, that was a major part of our day, and something I'm glad we did. As I said, it's worth the price of admission alone just for that exhibit, in my opinion. It's really done right. And if as I said, if you're looking for a theme park or a bunch of rides, this is not for you. But if you want to get up close and personal with the real deal, then yeah, Kennedy Space Center is definitely not to be missed. So after that, we did the short bus ride out to the Apollo exhibit. This takes you past the vehicle assembly building, takes you past where the walker brings the spaceships out to the launch pads. You get to see a few other things here and there. It's just a really short trip. They have a longer bus ride that takes you to more places if you want to get a more expanded view of NASA and a more in-depth view of the different launch pads and the different buildings and whatnot. I'd like to go back and do that tour sometime soon. But so we get out to the Apollo exhibit. They take you in, they sort of introduce you to the Apollo program. They take you into the launch control room, and they do a simulated launch control sort of sequence, and it's a pretty cool little experience, and it's the real launch control room that they used for the launches there. All the original very old electronic panels and screens and dials and knobs and buttons and all that. It's all the real deal stuff that they used back in the 60s to launch those old ships. After you have that experience, you walk out into the main exhibit hallway, right into the business end of a Saturn V rocket. It's amazing how huge a Saturn V rocket is. It's just, I would have loved to have seen one of those launch. Gigantic piece of rocketry there, and very impressively, and they have it laid out really nicely. This is one area where the Apollo exhibit is a lot better than the Atlantis Space Shuttle exhibit, in my opinion. There's a lot of artifacts when it comes to the Apollo missions, lots of different things that you can see. So yeah, we spent a couple hours out there as well. Caught one of the late buses back to the main visitors complex, and that pretty much did it for our day. We really didn't get to do everything. There were some IMAX movies that we didn't get to see, some other few little things. We did get a chance. There's an exhibit right when you enter the park that talks about the early history of that part of Florida, Titusville area, before the Space Center program. As well as the nature of the area, the natural habitats, and it is also a wildlife refuge there, so it talks about some of the animals that can be found there and stuff. And they have a small exhibit sort of talking about that there, so that was pretty neat. So all in all, the Kennedy Space Center was an awesome experience. I'm glad we went. As I said, I want to go back and explore it again. I want to do that longer bus tour of the Space Center. And there's also a lunch with an astronaut kind of thing you can do for an extra $25, I think it is, which I think is probably worth it from the video I saw here on YouTube. Really cool. You get to have lunch with an astronaut. It's a buffet, and you get to ask questions, and they talk about their particular experiences of being in space. Different depending on the day you're there. It depends on which astronaut you get. But that's a cool little experience that I hope to have in the future. So that's my thoughts on the Kennedy Space Center. I loved it. As I said, if you're looking for a theme park, it's not for you. If you want to get up close and personal with real deal spacecraft, then yeah, absolutely, it's worth your time to visit. Thank you for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this, and have a great day, great night, whatever it is. See you again soon. Cheers.